Another sentence that I wrote down, I believe, yesterday when I was finishing the book. You said that in a time when the church seems to permit certain evils, you said, "quote the only secure protection will be a dedicated approach to prayer."
I mean, again, whatever happens, the Eucharist is still there, prayer is still there, the Rosary is still, in our hands, and to keep a steady, committed life of prayer. And that is a problem today.
Hmm.
This is why we do have a kind of sense of a remnant group in the church who's very, very prayerful,
Hmm.
intensely prayerful. But when we drift away from prayer, if we're not giving ourselves more fully in prayer, then we may, be more blind to what's happening. The risk is that we assume everything that would come from the Vatican is necessarily the will of God. Everything is blessed by God if it comes from or we become, a little too disgruntled
Hmm.
and turn against the church
Yeah.
when it's a wounded church, and we need to remain, at the heart of that wound ourselves.
You suggested at one point that this time may require a greater heroism of prayer that perhaps wouldn't be asked of us in other times. And perhaps just being an ordinary, quote unquote, being thinking of oneself, I'm just an ordinary Catholic, and 5 decades of the Rosary a day and going to Mass, a few times a week. Maybe that's great. That's great. But maybe we will be required to just to survive spiritually ourselves, let alone help save souls. Maybe we will be required to have a more heroic prayer life like that of the saints that we read about in books, which of course is what we should all be called to at all times, but especially now, even just to that's how I feel about myself, even just to stay in the state of grace is I need a much more serious prayer life.
I mean, I love what you just said, because I think that's very true. That I think we're in a time now where, in the past, a person who went to Mass every Sunday and said a casual prayer or two, they considered themselves, a good practicing Catholic if they stayed out of mortal sin. But I think now, with also the drifting away from the faith, part of the book in the beginning, as you know, is speaking of this indifference to God, that, the banality of
Mm.
unbelief. I mean, I see it in New York City. I have a sense of that. But that people have lost God apathetically now. It's not as even a hostile reaction to the existence of God. They have just lost God. So I think it's an important time now that we are very conscious in charity for the sake of souls, that we don't want to see people lost. And we're becoming ripe in our society for something, much worse to take place as it becomes more godless. So it's very important to step up, to be all in, so to speak, ourselves, if we can, to go to daily mass, to pray the rosary every day, to get whatever we can into a life of prayer, pausing in the day, for some prayer, to be more serious. And because that clash between light and darkness is very, very sharp now, I think, and may likely intensify.